Hey, Spooky Squad! Welcome back or welcome in to Spooky Tales, your home for eerie legends and unsettling mysteries told in a way that chills the spine while guiding you gently into the night. Tonight, we're traveling far from the comfort of our own homes to a place where history, legend, and tragedy are woven together so tightly that you can almost feel the weight of every untold story pressing against the walls. The place is called Hotel Del Salto, or as it's chillingly known in English, the Hotel of the Leap. And if that name alone doesn't make your stomach twist, the stories behind it surely will. This hotel sits perched like a ghost on the edge of one of Colombia's most dramatic natural wonders, the Tequendama Falls, a roaring cascade that plummets nearly 500 feet into a dark mist below. Imagine standing there at night, the air heavy with the scent of wet stone and river spray, the falls echoing like an endless growl, and behind you, the looming silhouette of a French-style mansion built in the 1920s. It looks like a fairy tale castle from one angle, but from another, it resembles a tomb. And maybe, in a way, that's exactly what it became. The Hotel Del Salto was the dream of architect Carlos Arturo Tapias, who designed the building in 1923 with every intention of turning it into a luxury escape. Back then, Colombia's elite wanted European-style grandeur, tall windows, ornate balconies, elegant stonework, all of it echoing the architecture you might see in Paris or Madrid. And the location? Perfect. The falls themselves were not just a natural wonder, but also a symbol of strength and beauty. Guests could sip expensive wine while gazing at one of the most stunning views in South America. But there was something else, something darker, that lingered in the cliffs, in the mist, in the water. Guests didn't just come for the view. Some came for the fall. You see, the Tequendama Falls had already been a site of death long before the hotel was ever built. According to legend, the indigenous Muisca people leapt from these cliffs centuries ago to escape the cruelty of Spanish colonizers. The story goes that instead of dying, the gods transformed them into eagles, allowing them to soar away to freedom. It's a tragic and powerful tale of resistance, sacrifice, and transformation. But whether you believe the legend or not, what cannot be denied is that the falls became etched in Colombian culture as a place where lives ended, willingly or otherwise. And when the Hotel Del Salto opened its doors, just beside it, it was almost as though that energy seeped right through the walls. By the 1950s, the hotel had earned its unsettling reputation. Guests would check in, dazzled by the grandeur and beauty of the place. But soon enough, whispers began to spread. Whispers about people vanishing. Whispers about guests being drawn, almost magnetically, toward the balcony railings. Whispers about footsteps echoing down empty corridors at night, and the feeling, an undeniable chill, of being watched by someone who wasn't really there. In some cases, guests never checked out. They took the leap that the hotel's name so grimly hinted at. Locals began to call it cursed, haunted, even damned. And the irony was cruel. A place built to celebrate life, leisure, and beauty had become a beacon for death. Think about it. A grand hotel perched over a roaring waterfall where dozens, if not hundreds, of people have chosen to end their lives. The energy of despair hangs heavy there, mixing with the mist in the air. Every stone, every hallway, every locked room feels like it's holding a secret. And perhaps that's why so many paranormal investigators today consider the Hotel Del Salto to be one of the most haunted places on Earth. The building has seen too much sorrow to remain silent. Some say if you stand on the balcony late at night, you can hear the cries of those who jumped. Others claim the shadows of lost souls still drift along the cliffside, trapped between this world and the one beyond. And when you hear the thunder of the falls, sometimes it's said that the sound bends, warping into something more like a scream. But what happened to the hotel itself? Did it collapse under the weight of its own tragedies? Not exactly. By the 1990s, pollution in the Bogota River had made the area unbearable, and the hotel officially closed its doors. Yet even in silence, the building didn't fade away. In fact, it only grew more terrifying. Abandoned hallways, broken windows, graffiti on crumbling walls, yet still standing tall, daring anyone brave enough to step inside. The Hotel Del Salto became a magnet for ghost hunters, thrill seekers, and those obsessed with death. It was said that the spirits of the lost had claimed it as their permanent residence, turning it into a place where the living entered at their own risk. And here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Today, the building no longer functions as a hotel. Instead, it has been transformed into a museum dedicated to Colombian biodiversity and environmental restoration. But make no mistake, no amount of educational plaques or cheerful tour guides can completely erase the past. Visitors still report strange sensations, sudden chills in rooms with no drafts, the overwhelming urge to approach the windows, and the feeling that unseen eyes are following them through every exhibit. It may be called a museum now, but to those who know its history, it will always remain what it once was, the Suicide Hotel. So tonight, we're going to peel back the layers of this chilling place, its origins, its legends, its tragedies, and its hauntings. By the end, you'll understand why Hotel Del Salto is not just a building, not just a museum, but a living, breathing monument to despair. And perhaps something far beyond that. The story of Hotel Del Salto begins with ambition, beauty, and the promise of luxury. But beneath that polished dream, shadows were already gathering. When Carlos Arturo Tapias envisioned this grand structure in 1923, he wasn't just designing a hotel. He was crafting a symbol of wealth and power, a retreat for Colombia's upper class, a jewel overlooking the thundering Tequendama Falls. The architecture itself was dazzling, modeled in a French Gothic style, with steep gables, arched windows, and ornate balconies that seemed to float above the abyss. To visitors arriving for the first time, it was like stepping into another world, a slice of Europe nestled on the cliffs of South America, where mist curled around stone walls like ghostly fingers, and the roar of the falls provided an endless backdrop. Wealthy families, politicians, and socialites gathered there to drink, dance, and indulge in a life that most Colombians could only dream about. Yet, from the very beginning, something felt off. Guests often described the building as breathtaking during the day, when the sunlight lit up the spray of the waterfalls, casting rainbows through the mist. But at night, the mood shifted. Shadows seemed to linger too long, stretching unnaturally across the hallways. The cries of the waterfalls transformed from a calming rumble to something mournful, like 1,000 voices wailing from the depths below. Some guests complained of unsettling dreams when they stayed overnight, dreams of falling, of standing at the edge of the balcony and feeling an invisible force pushing them forward. And while staff dismissed these accounts as nerves or imagination, the unease was impossible to ignore. The hotel's reputation began to change as reports of death surfaced. At first, they were whispered rumors, stories of a woman in despair over lost love, stepping over the railing and disappearing into the fog. Then another tale, a businessman, burdened by financial ruin, choosing the cliffs as his final resting place. Soon, what had been rare became alarmingly frequent. The hotel's name, Del Salto, of the leap, seemed less like an elegant title and more like a grim prophecy. Locals began to talk, their voices carrying warnings. They said the hotel was cursed, that the land itself was soaked with sorrow long before the building was erected. For generations, the Muisca people's legend of leaping into freedom had carried a powerful symbolism. But now, it seemed, the cliffs were demanding something more, an endless offering of broken souls. As tragedies multiplied, so did the stories of hauntings. Maids reported seeing figures in hallways that vanished when approached. Guests swore they heard knocking on their doors at night, only to find no one there. Some even claimed to see dripping wet figures wandering the grounds, apparitions that left no footprints on the marble floors. The staff, bound by loyalty or perhaps fear of losing their livelihoods, said little. But behind closed doors, they admitted to each other that something inside the hotel was watching, listening, waiting. Even the locals avoided the area after sunset, whispering about how the mist carried the voices of the dead. And yet, ironically, these dark stories didn't keep people away. If anything, they attracted more curious visitors. To many, Hotel Del Salto was a paradox, a place of beauty and despair, luxury and death. Couples would book rooms for romantic getaways, only to spend the night rattled by eerie noises. Adventurers and thrill seekers came to see if the rumors were true, some leaving with stories that would haunt them for years. And then there were those who came for a different reason altogether, people who saw the falls not as a view, but as an escape. The hotel became, quite literally, a magnet for those who no longer wanted to live. By the mid-20th century, the tragedies had become so well known that the Hotel Del Salto was no longer just a destination, it was a legend. People spoke of it in hushed tones, as if naming it too loudly might call forth the spirits that lingered there. Newspapers occasionally reported on the suicides, but many stories never made the press. The official records may have been scarce, but the walls of the hotel kept their own grim tally. Every echo, every chill in the corridor, every unexplained shadow was a reminder of the lives claimed by the cliffs. It's chilling to imagine what it must have been like to be a guest there during those years. To walk out onto the balcony in the moonlight, with mist rising like smoke from the falls below, and feel the overwhelming pull of the abyss. Some claimed that the cliffs had a voice that if you stood there too long, you begin to hear it whispering your name, calling you to join the countless others who had already leapt. Whether those whispers came from the falls, from the spirits, or from the depths of one's own despair, no one could say. But too many answered that call for it to be coincidence. And so, Hotel Del Salto's reputation as the Suicide Hotel was sealed. What began as a vision of elegance had become something else entirely. A place where life and death danced in the same ballroom, where the walls held both laughter and cries, where beauty was inseparable from tragedy. The building itself seemed to stand as a warning, its elegant facade masking the sorrow that seeped through every stone. For those who dared to visit, it wasn't just a hotel, it was a confrontation with mortality, and sometimes mortality won. The legends surrounding Hotel Del Salto aren't just vague whispers carried by the mist, they are stories, often painfully personal, that have been passed down through locals, investigators, and even the few brave guests who dared to share what they saw. If the architecture and the location gave the building its eerie foundation, then it was these stories, the human tragedies, that breathe life into the ghostly reputation of the Suicide Hotel. Each tale, whether true, exaggerated, or mythologized over time, adds another layer of dread to the hotel's crumbling walls. One of the earliest and most frequently retold accounts is that of a young bride. As the story goes, she checked into the hotel with her new husband during the 1930s. On the surface, they were the picture of happiness, dressed in fine clothes, dining on the best food, dancing in the candlelit halls. But the marriage, according to the staff who later recounted it, was already cracking under pressure. Late one evening, after a heated argument, the bride was seen walking alone toward the balcony that overlooked the falls. She never came back. Her body was never recovered from the depths of the churning waters below. Ever since, guests have claimed to see a figure in a white gown wandering the hallways at night, her face obscured by a veil of dripping water. Some say she pauses at the edge of their bed, staring silently until they wake in terror. Others hear only the sound of sobbing echoing through the corridors, though no one can ever find the source. Another infamous story centers around a wealthy businessman who frequented the hotel in the 1940s. By day, he appeared confident, social, and charismatic, always entertaining clients and boasting about his ventures. But his fortune, it turned out, was unraveling. One evening, after losing nearly everything in a failed deal, he asked for a bottle of the finest wine, sat at his favorite balcony table, and stared out at the falls for hours. Witnesses claimed they saw him raise a toast to no one before climbing over the railing and vanishing into the mist. Some guests later insisted that his presence still lingers in that same dining hall. When they sit alone at night, they sometimes feel the table beside them shake slightly, as though someone invisible has just taken a seat. A strong scent of wine, sour and pungent, reportedly fills the air before fading just as quickly as it came. Perhaps the most chilling tales, though, come not from the guests, but from the hotel staff themselves. Housekeepers spoke of rooms that refused to stay clean, beds that appeared slept in even after being freshly made, windows that were left closed but somehow found open again, curtains that swayed as though touched by unseen hands. One caretaker even swore that he saw a wet handprint smeared across a mirror in a room that had been locked and unoccupied for days. Night watchmen reported footsteps pacing behind them, though no one was there. Some eventually refused to work certain shifts, claiming the atmosphere of dread was too heavy to endure. Over the decades, these accounts solidified the belief that Hotel Del Salto wasn't just a building, it was a gathering place for restless spirits. Paranormal enthusiasts began flocking there, eager to capture evidence of the supernatural. Some recorded EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, that revealed chilling whispers, voices muttering in Spanish, English, and even in languages thought to be indigenous to the region. Others brought cameras and captured shadowy figures by the windows, watching them with hollow eyes. The most unnerving images often showed people standing at the balcony railing, figures that disappeared when approached, almost as though the cliffs themselves were recreating the last moments of those who left. Locals, too, have their own share of unsettling experiences. Farmers and travelers who pass by at night claim to see lights flickering in the supposedly abandoned hotel long after its closure in the 1990s. Some described music faintly drifting from the halls, soft piano notes, or the muffled sound of a ballroom dance, only to vanish when anyone dared to approach. Taxi drivers refused to pick up passengers who waved from outside the building after midnight, insisting that more than once they had stopped to collect a figure only for the back seat to be empty when they glanced in the mirror. One legend often told in hushed voices involves a group of curious teens who sneaked into the hotel after its closure. According to the story, they wandered the empty corridors, laughing nervously until they reached the grand staircase. There, one of them swore he saw a man at the top, drenched head to toe, his clothes tattered and dripping, his eyes hollow. The man raised a hand as though to beckon them closer. Terrified, the group fled, but when they looked back, no one was there. To this day, the story circulates in nearby towns as a warning. The hotel isn't abandoned, not really. It belongs to those who never left. But what makes these tales so haunting is how they overlap with the hotel's grim reality. For every legend, there are dozens of real accounts of people who ended their lives at Tequendama Falls. The line between ghost story and history blurs until it becomes impossible to separate fact from myth. Did the bride truly leap on her wedding night? Did the businessman's spirit linger over his final drink? Or are these just echoes of countless tragedies reshaped into tales that help the living process what they cannot understand? Whatever the answer, the result is the same. Hotel Del Salto stands as a monument to sorrow, with each story adding another invisible tenant to its endless, haunted halls. By the second half of the 20th century, the grandeur of Hotel Del Salto was fading. What had once been a jewel of Colombian high society was now showing cracks, both literally and metaphorically. The once bustling halls grew quieter. The rich elite who once flocked to its elegant balconies slowly began to disappear. Part of the decline was practical. The surrounding environment was changing. The Bogota River, once considered a natural treasure, became heavily polluted as industrialization spread through Colombia. By the 1970s and 80s, the water that poured over Tequendama Falls was no longer the pristine symbol of nature's power. Instead, it was thick, dark, and foul-smelling, carrying with it chemicals and waste from the city. The air that once refreshed guests with cool, misty breezes now carried the stench of contamination. What had been marketed as a paradise retreat was becoming increasingly unbearable, and the hotel's reputation for luxury began to rot. But while the natural beauty decayed, the supernatural reputation only grew stronger. As the glamour faded, the darkness took over. Fewer paying guests meant that those who did arrive were often thrill seekers, curious wanderers, or people battling personal demons. The number of suicides reportedly increased during this period, and every death only added fuel to the fire of the hotel's grim identity. Locals began to avoid the area altogether, muttering that the hotel was hungry, that it drew in broken souls, as if the cliffs demanded sacrifices. Even taxi drivers grew hesitant to drive tourists near the falls at night, insisting that too many strange things had happened on the winding roads leading up to the cliffside. The staff, too, began to feel the change. Former employees described how the once lively atmosphere grew heavy with despair. Ballrooms that had echoed with laughter and music were now empty shells, where the only sound was the endless roar of the waterfall. Some housekeepers refused to clean certain rooms, claiming that no matter how many times they straightened the sheets or scrubbed the mirrors, the signs of occupation returned: creases in the bedding, handprints on the glass, shadows moving across the floor. Even the managers began to quietly admit that the building no longer felt like a place for the living. By the late 1980s, the decline was undeniable. The wealthy no longer came. Tourism dwindled. The polluted river and decaying infrastructure made it difficult to market the hotel as a luxury destination. Finally, in the early 1990s, the inevitable happened. The hotel closed its doors. Officially, it was for economic reasons, a casualty of changing times and environmental decline. Unofficially, however, locals knew the truth. The hotel had claimed too many lives, seen too much sorrow, and carried too much darkness to continue. It was no longer a place of celebration. It had become a mausoleum. But if anyone thought that closing the hotel would silence its reputation, they were wrong. In fact, abandonment only amplified its eerie allure. With no guests and no staff to fill its halls, the building itself began to decay. Paint peeled from the walls, windows shattered, and ivy clawed its way up the stone. Furniture lay covered in dust, and water seeped through cracks, leaving mold to thrive in the corners. By day, it looked like a ruin, sad, empty, forgotten. By night, however, the hotel seemed alive again, though not in any way that comforted the living. Paranormal investigators and urban explorers who braved its corridors after closure described the experience as overwhelming. The silence inside was not peaceful but suffocating, broken only by the occasional echo of something unseen moving in the distance. Some swore they heard voices, faint conversations, as though the parties of decades past were still going on. Others reported sudden, icy blasts of wind in rooms with no open windows. Flashlights flickered inexplicably, batteries drained within minutes, and cameras often captured images that defied explanation. Figures standing in the background, faces pressed against broken windows, shadows where no shadows should have been. The mist from the falls, rolling in through the shattered windows, seemed to carry whispers with it. More than one explorer admitted that they felt an almost unbearable urge to walk toward the balconies, as if invisible hands were guiding them to the edge. Local legends grew even darker during the years of abandonment. Teenagers dared each other to sneak inside, often leaving with wild stories of ghostly figures chasing them through the halls. Farmers nearby claimed they saw lights glowing inside the building when no electricity was connected. A few insisted that music could still be heard drifting across the cliffs at night, the faint melody of a piano playing the same mournful notes over and over. Whether these accounts were real, exaggerated, or born of fear didn't matter. Each story added to the mystique, solidifying Hotel Del Salto as a place where the past refused to stay buried. Interestingly, during its years of decay, the hotel drew not just thrill seekers, but also those desperate for answers. Families who had lost loved ones to the falls sometimes visited the ruins, leaving flowers near the balconies or whispering prayers into the mist. They claimed they felt their relatives' presence in the air, as though the souls of the departed lingered just out of reach. It's easy to understand why. The falls were not just a natural wonder, they were a grave, one that had claimed countless unnamed victims. The hotel, standing vigil above them, was a reminder of every tragedy, every leap, every life cut short. In its abandoned state, Hotel Del Salto became something far greater than the architect could ever have imagined. It was no longer merely a hotel, or even a ruin. It was a monument to despair, a shrine to sorrow, and a playground for spirits that had nowhere else to go. To this day, those who visited during its darkest years insist that the building itself seemed to breathe. You could feel it watching, waiting, hungering for the next story, the next soul, the next chapter in its long history of tragedy. When the doors of Hotel Del Salto closed in the early 1990s, many believed it would eventually collapse into obscurity. After all, without guests, without business, without upkeep, what future could a decaying shell possibly hold? For nearly 2 decades, the building sat in silence, claimed by ivy, rain, and memory. But as the years passed, the question of what to do with such a prominent landmark became unavoidable. After all, the hotel wasn't just a building. It was perched beside one of Colombia's greatest natural wonders, a place where culture, history, and legend collided. And so, in 2011, an unexpected decision was made. Hotel Del Salto would be reborn, not as a hotel, but as a museum. The plan was ambitious. Officially named the Museo del Agua Biodiversity Museum of Water and Biodiversity, the project aimed to transform a site known for tragedy into one that celebrated life, science, and environmental restoration. For decades, the Bogota River and Tequendama Falls had been drowning in pollution, their once pristine waters stained with the waste of industrial expansion. The museum, funded in part by environmental organizations and cultural preservation groups, was designed not only to preserve the historic building, but also to educate visitors about the importance of protecting Colombia's biodiversity. On paper, it was a noble cause, a story of redemption, a way of rewriting the building's grim legacy. When renovations began, workers quickly realized the task was not just physical, but psychological. The walls themselves seemed weighed down with sorrow. Every nail removed, every broken window replaced, carried with it the echo of what the building had once been. Construction crews reported unsettling experiences during the restoration, tools disappearing, sudden drops in temperature, feelings of being watched. One worker even claimed he heard someone whisper his name while he was alone in a room. Another swore he saw a figure standing at the far end of a hallway, only for it to vanish when he approached. Whether these were tricks of the imagination or genuine encounters, the unease spread through the crews. Many said openly that the hotel did not want to change, that it resisted being cleansed. Still, the renovations continued, and by late 2013, the museum opened its doors to the public. Inside, visitors could explore exhibits about Colombia's natural resources, learn about endangered species, and reflect on the importance of water in sustaining life. The atmosphere was bright, polished, and educational. Families toured the halls, students scribbled notes for school projects, and tourists snapped photos of the spectacular view from the balconies. On the surface, it seemed that the building had finally shed its dark past. But beneath the cheerful displays, the shadows still lingered. For many visitors, the experience of walking through the museum was unnerving, even if they couldn't explain why. Some described feeling a heavy presence the moment they entered, as if unseen eyes were following them. Others reported sudden waves of sadness, a melancholy that seemed to seep into their bones without warning. Tour guides admitted privately that they avoided certain areas when alone, particularly the upper floors, where the atmosphere was noticeably colder and more oppressive. Even with walls freshly painted and hallways restored, the hotel's reputation as the Suicide Hotel refused to die. Paranormal investigators wasted no time in testing whether the new museum was truly free of its ghosts. The results were chilling. Several teams claimed to capture EVPs within the newly restored rooms, whispers in Spanish that seemed to plead for help, or sobbing that bled through the silence. One recording in particular, taken in what had once been a guest suite, allegedly contained a single, chilling phrase, "No me diges care, don't let me fall." In another investigation, thermal cameras picked up sudden cold spots in hallways that had no draft or ventilation. Visitors walking through those areas often reported goosebumps or the strange sensation of being gently tugged toward the windows. Locals, too, remained skeptical of the transformation. "You can paint the walls," one resident was quoted as saying, "but you can't paint over death." For generations, the Tequendama Falls had symbolized despair as much as beauty, and the hotel had been a vessel for that despair. Turning it into a museum might have changed its outward purpose, but it could never erase what happened there. Many believe that the souls of those who leapt from the cliffs remain bound to the site, unable or unwilling to leave. To them, the museum is nothing more than a mask, a thin veil over an ancient wound. Visitors who dared to ask tour guides about the suicides were often met with carefully rehearsed answers. Officially, the museum does not highlight the tragedies of the past. Instead, it focuses on environmental education and history. But ask the guides off the record, and many admit the truth. Yes, strange things happen here. Yes, people feel things they can't explain. And yes, even they sometimes hear the cries of those who leapt. To walk through the halls is to walk with ghosts, whether you acknowledge them or not. Ironically, the museum's creation may have amplified the legends rather than silenced them. The very act of reopening the building brought new life to old stories. Tourists now visit not only for the biodiversity exhibits, but also to experience the infamous Suicide Hotel. Ghost hunters continue to arrive with cameras and recorders. Travelers post videos online about their eerie encounters. The line between history and horror has blurred, making Hotel Del Salto both an educational destination and a paranormal hotspot. In the end, the transformation of Hotel Del Salto into a museum is a paradox. On one hand, it represents redemption, a chance to use a site of death to teach about life and preservation. On the other hand, it cannot escape the energy that has clung to it for nearly a century. The walls still whisper, the balconies still beckon, the mist still carries secrets. And though the museum may try to tell a story of science and hope, the building itself tells another, one of despair, of tragedy, and of restless souls that refuse to let go. When you step back and look at the story of the Hotel Del Salto, it almost feels like the building itself was never meant to be just a hotel. Its fate was written long before Carlos Arturo Tapias drew his designs or the first stone was laid. The land it sits on, those towering cliffs above Tequendama Falls, already carried centuries of sorrow and legend. The Muisca tribe's leap into the mist to escape Spanish colonizers is more than just a tragic story. It created an imprint, a stain on the very soil that no amount of concrete or architecture could cover. Perhaps that is why, even after it became a hotel, and later a museum, the stories of people drawn to the edge, people who couldn't resist the call of the falls, never truly stopped. The land itself seems to invite despair. It's as if the cliffs whisper to anyone who dares get too close. One step, and all your pain ends here. Think about it. How many hotels do you know where the number of stories about suicides, ghosts, and mysterious deaths overshadows the actual memories of guests enjoying their stay? The Hotel Del Salto was supposed to be a luxury escape for Colombia's wealthy elite, a place to admire the majesty of nature from a safe distance. But the distance was never truly safe, was it? That balcony wasn't a viewpoint, it was a doorway. And for many, stepping through it didn't mean admiring the scenery. It meant giving themselves to it. That is what makes this place so chilling. It's not just haunted by those who jumped, it's haunted by the idea that maybe the falls themselves, and the cliffs they carve, want you to join them. Even today, the museum may feel brighter, polished, restored with new paint and exhibits. But visitors report the same cold shiver as soon as they step inside. They say you can hear the cries of those who leapt echoing faintly through the open windows. Some claim to see pale figures walking the hallways, dressed in fashions from decades long gone. Others swear they feel someone gently pushing them toward the balcony railing, the kind of soft but insistent nudge you'd mistake for a friend, until you realize you're standing alone. No guide, no other visitor, no staff member nearby. Just you, the wind, and the drop. The hotel may be a museum now, but it's not just preserving history, it's holding on to something alive, something that refuses to move on. What makes the Hotel Del Salto truly unsettling is not just the ghosts, or the suicides, or the legends of the Musca. It's the blending of them all. The land remembers the tribe who leapt for freedom. The building remembers the countless guests who leapt for despair. And the falls themselves, with their roaring mist and thunderous plunge, seem to welcome each soul with open arms, erasing them in an instant yet keeping their presence in the spray. It's like layers upon layers of tragedy, one era feeding into the next, until the hotel became a magnet for grief, a place where death feels more natural than life. So the question lingers, if you were to stand there on that balcony, staring out at the breathtaking Tequendama Falls, would you feel the same pull? Would you feel the whispers brushing against your ear, reminding you of the countless footsteps that stopped where you stand? Some visitors swear it's not imagination, it's real. They say the longer you gaze into the mist, the more it feels like the mist is gazing back, waiting. You might not believe in ghosts, or cursed places, or spirits trapped in stone and water, but the Hotel Del Salto doesn't need your belief. It's collected enough sorrow, enough fear, and enough lives to make its presence undeniable. And so, the Suicide Hotel remains one of the most haunted places on Earth. Not because of the deaths alone, but because of the invitation. That invisible hand tugging at your soul when you stand too close to the edge. Some people believe the hotel is cursed. Others believe the falls themselves are cursed. But maybe, just maybe, it's not a curse at all. Maybe it's the promise of release, a final leap into something unknown that keeps drawing people back. Either way, the next time you hear the thunder of a waterfall or see mist rising in the distance, remember the Hotel Del Salto. Remember the souls who answered the call, and ask yourself, would you be strong enough to walk away? Or would you take one last step forward into the mist? As you stand in the quiet halls of the Hotel Del Salto today, it's easy to forget for just a moment that this place was once drenched in sorrow. The museum's walls are painted and polished, the windows cleaned, the furniture carefully curated to tell the story of Colombia's history. Yet, if you linger long enough, if you allow yourself to stand alone in a corner when the tours have ended and the lights begin to dim, you begin to feel it. That subtle shift in atmosphere, as though the air is holding a memory. A faint chill wraps itself around your shoulders. The silence is not the silence of peace, but of expectation, as though the walls themselves are waiting for something or someone. Guides will tell you about architecture and history, about waterfalls and preservation, but locals whisper that the spirits of those who leapt from the cliffs never truly left. They claim the cries of despair still echo on misty nights, blending with the roar of Tequendama Falls. Some visitors report sudden waves of sadness while walking through the rooms, an overwhelming melancholy that doesn't belong to them. Others hear whispers in Spanish they can't quite understand, or feel as if invisible eyes are fixed on them from behind. The bravest have even leaned out from the balconies, only to swear they heard a chorus of voices urging them to jump. Is it suggestion? Is it the mind playing tricks in a place with such a grim reputation? Or is Hotel Del Salto still serving its original, tragic purpose, calling out to those who visit, tempting them toward the same fate that claimed so many before? Paranormal investigators who visited with cameras and recorders have captured unexplained sounds, knocks, footsteps, sobbing that fades into the roar of the falls. One team swears they saw a figure dressed in early 20th century clothes glide across a hallway before vanishing into the walls. The most chilling legends, however, tie back to the indigenous Muisca tribe. Locals say that when the Spanish invaded, the Muisca warriors and families chose to leap from these cliffs, not as an act of despair, but of defiance. They believed the river would carry their spirits back to freedom, away from their oppressors. That belief, some say, imprinted itself on the land. It's why the cliffs seem to call. It's why the falls seem to weep. And it's why the Hotel Del Salto, perched right on the edge of this eternal wound, cannot shake the aura of tragedy. To the colonizers, it was an escape from life. To the Muisca, it was a return to the earth. To the modern traveler, it's a reminder that some places are soaked not in water, but in memory. Even as the hotel has been transformed into a museum, shifting from a place of death to a place of education, the duality remains. The grandeur of its architecture and the breathtaking waterfall views still invite awe, but behind the beauty lies something unsettling. It's as though the building exists in two worlds, one in daylight, full of curious tourists snapping photos, and another after dark, where the shadows seem longer, the corridors colder, and the stories much too close for comfort. If you were to stand on the balcony at night, looking into the abyss with only the moonlight touching the falls, you might wonder what it would feel like to step forward. Would you feel the same defiance of the Muisca? The same despair of the hotel's lost guests? Or would you feel nothing at all until the wind and water swallowed you whole? That thought alone keeps many from leaning too close. Perhaps that's the true horror of Hotel Del Salto. It blurs the line between history and haunting, between beauty and death, between a museum and a mausoleum. You don't need to see a ghost here to feel haunted. The building itself is the ghost. Its foundations are soaked in grief. Its balconies are invitations written in stone. Its staircases are pathways not just through floors, but through eras of sorrow stacked one upon the other. You leave not with a souvenir, but with a shiver that lingers long after you've returned to the modern world. A reminder that some places never let you go, because they themselves can never move on. So, the next time you find yourself in Colombia, staring at the majestic Tequendama Falls, you'll know what waits just beyond the mist. A hotel that is more than a relic, more than a museum, more than a story whispered by locals. It is a scar carved into the landscape, stitched with myths, deaths, and spirits. They call it Hotel Del Salto, the Hotel of the Leap, but to those who know, it's something far more sinister. It's an echo chamber of despair, a monument to every scream that ever disappeared into the thunder of the falls. And if you listen closely, really closely, you might just hear them calling your name. And that, my friends, is the chilling story of Colombia's Hotel Del Salto, the suicide hotel that still clings to the cliffs above Tequendama Falls. A place where beauty and tragedy meet, where legends refuse to die, and where the shadows of the past still reach out to the present. Do you believe the spirits of those who left remain, or is it all just the power of suggestion? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to Spooky Tales, and ring the bell so you never miss another story from the darker side of our world. Until next time, sleep well, if you can.